Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, or whenever you happen to be listening to this. Welcome to the Film Realist Podcast, the film and TV podcast from a complete nobody that is hopefully for somebody. My name is Kyle Naranya, and on episode 97, I will be reviewing the fourth installment in the Beverly Hills Cop franchise, Beverly Hills Cop, Axel F. We're doing that thing where we're not using numbers anymore to trick new viewers. I thought we were past this in 2024, but apparently we are not. It released on July 3rd on Netflix, so if you still have Netflix for whatever reason, you could have watched it just like I did. There will be a non-spoiler section of the podcast as well as a spoiler section. Timecodes will be listed in the description, so no need to worry. If you just want to hear my initial reaction with no spoilers, that section will be listed for you. Then we will jump into listener mail, and there may be a micro review of Despicable Me 4. Let's jump into non-spoilers for Beverly Hills Cop, Axel F.
You know, this is very embarrassing.
You know, part of me rather get locked up than get put in this little Fisher-Price-looking squad car.
Y'all are the Lego cops.
Now, before getting into the non-spoiler review of Beverly Hills Cop Axel F, I wanted to introduce a type of sequel that's become more prevalent in recent film history, and that is this idea of the legacy sequel. Now, if you're relatively new to film, or you're not a diehard film snob, cinephile, maybe this is your first time on the Film Realist. Hello, welcome. My name is Kyle. A legacy sequel typically is describing a sequel to a franchise that has pretty much been long dormant for a long time. Think of your Tron legacies, your Top Gun Mavericks, probably the most successful in recent memory. You could go back to something like Rocky Balboa, and then even continue that with something like Creed, which kind of fills in two things as a reboot and a spin-off all at the same time. So this idea, it's not necessarily a new one, and I hear a lot of people complaining about sequels, remakes being made for franchises that have been long dead, things that are memorable and remembered. Well, yeah, if you're complaining about that and you only watch these things, maybe see some original films. I would recommend The Fall Guy, Monkey Man, just as examples of this year alone. Axel Foley, or I want to call it Axel Foley because this has also been done with Jason Bourne. I already mentioned Rocky Balboa, but with Beverly Hills Cop Axel F, not 4. I don't know anyone who's going to watch this that doesn't know there are No, there aren't 33 installments. There are 3 previous ones. And the gap being 30 years is quite substantial. It's one of the largest in these legacy sequels. Without getting into specifics, this is going to be hard to discuss because my real issues with this are really going to only be in the spoiler section of the review. But in terms of legacy sequels, Beverly Hills Cop Axel F, it's kind of straight down the middle. It is by no means a Zoolander 2, but it's not a Rocky Balboa, a Top Gun Maverick, a Creed. Not even a Tron Legacy. I love Tron Legacy. That's one of my favorite films from that time period. One of the only ones to use 3D in a really great way. And don't get me started on the Daft Punk soundtrack. And I will be discussing the Beverly Hills Cop Axel F soundtrack in this review. I might as well do that right now. The Beverly Hills Cop theme is an iconic piece of music with the synth that was used back in 1984. And the music for this was done by Lorne. I want to say it's Balfe. He's a Scottish gentleman who's kind of appeared recently. If you're a longtime film score fan, Stephanie, if you're listening, I know that you are. And he's done Top Gun Maverick, the last 2 Mission Impossible films. I'd be surprised if he's not working on whatever the Dead Reckoning Part 2 is now retitled, as well as the last 2 Bad Boys films. So this composer knows how to handle scores. And that's one of my main criticisms, believe it or not, is that I love the Beverly Hills Cop theme, Axel F being the title of a Crazy Frog song that if you're in the younger generation, you would have probably heard it there first before realizing it was a character theme or a movie theme or a franchise theme, which is hilarious to me. And if you're on Twitter, Crazy Frog came back. Not something I think anybody wanted. And of course, I thought of this and then saw it in meme form, which is that of Poe Dameron saying somehow Crazy Frog has returned, which made me laugh quite a bit. Beverly Hills Cop Axel F is another installment in the franchise. I saw this as a tweet after I had seen the film as a positive thing, which is it is just another adventure, which to some people they really like that from these legacy sequels, returning to a franchise, kind of just continuing where we're going, no retrospective, no real character growth, no drama really. Well, there is in this, and I will bring it up in spoilers. And I think that's the real problem here. The last Beverly Hills Cop was in 1994. 30 years almost, what was the day? May 25th, so past the date of when that film came out. And because of that, unfortunately, the time frame is only really addressed in the two relationships that are essentially new to the film. This is in the trailers, so I don't feel that this is a spoiler, so plug your ears if you didn't want to hear about spoilers, which is that Axel has an estranged daughter. Ironic how I had Sean O'Connell from Cinema Blend on for his Bruce Willis book a month ago, and we discussed, of course, Die Hard 4, Live Free or Die Hard, and an estranged relationship with our protagonist is not a new thing. It seems to be a very similar in a lot of legacy sequels to bring in an estranged child of some point. Die Hard did it twice. And because of this relationship being the key point of it is very bare bones. It's minimal at best. Their relationships are estranged, of course, because of their separation. And without getting into specific details as to why they are estranged, Axel is just being Axel, and that is one of the pros of the film. Eddie Murphy returning to this character, it does feel like Axel Foley 30 years later, but a lot of what we've seen from him has not continued over time, or if anything, he's been stagnant. It was a criticism for Spider-Man No Way Home that Andrew Garfield and Tobey Maguire's Peters/Spideys felt like they'd been frozen in amber and had not continued to do anything until we saw them in 2021, and Axel kind of feels the same way. His character is just sort of doing the same thing, and quite frankly, somebody in Eddie Murphy's age range, being 63 now, wouldn't necessarily be approaching everything the same, just from a biological standpoint, where he would probably be falling apart. That's one of the best parts about Eddie Murphy's character of Axel F to begin with. He was not an overly physical guy. There's that funny gif of Eddie Murphy's stunt double throwing somebody over a table, but Axel was much more ragtag in the John McClane camp of quote-unquote action heroes. Of course, Beverly Hills Cop always was more comedy than action, but even still, the character doesn't feel aged. He just has the same sort of perspective. And the film, unfortunately, because of that, does not feel modern in its sensibilities. I believe this is Mark Malloy's first feature film, and because of that, it does feel like a first-time director. The film was supposed to be directed by Arbi and Bilal, who went on to go do Batgirl, and look into that, quite unfortunate, but I did review their more recent film with Bad Boys for Life, not for Life. See what I did? They named the movies wrong. Bad Boys Ride or Die, and those films really play with the cinematography. A lot of Beverly Hills Cop feels as if it was made for streaming. The dynamic use of the camera is quite pedestrian at times. The story as a whole, it's fine. There's typically not a lot to talk about with films that are kind of straight down the barrel, 7 out of 10s, which is unfortunate. And because of that, a lot of this film feels kind of rudimentary. We've done this stuff before. This, from a script level, Will Beal, who did work on this, has worked on films I've quite enjoyed. He was involved with, I believe it was Wonder Woman and Zack Snyder's Justice League, and did work on Ride or Die. But Ride or Die manages to continue a through line from Bad Boys for Life, where Beverly Hills Cop Axel F is an installment 30 years later, but everything that's happened that's been interesting has happened off screen, which hurts the film's overall narrative because they're constantly doing retrospection, but having to move forward. So you're not getting characters nostalgia for their adventures. It's just like, hey, we're going on to the next thing. And because of that, it feels less interesting. These characters have been apart for 30 years. We know that because of the conversations that they have throughout the film, and it doesn't feel epic. It feels small scale. I understand that the budget for this was $150 million. I'm really curious how much of that was for Eddie Murphy in particular, where he was also a producer on the film. And this use of the budget in terms of the small scale of the action sequences does feel made for streaming. This film would not have spectacle on the big screen, unfortunately, and that hurts this franchise, in my opinion, because of the fact that the previous films were a smaller scale, but the comedy really helped pull them through. The original film only cost $13 million, and while the ending of these films typically was in some sort of base and a shootout, it wasn't Die Hard with big explosions, but the character dynamics are the favorite part. Some of the new additions to this are quite interesting, while some are just cardboard cutouts of characters. Kevin Bacon's in particular is so one note, and it's unfortunate because Kevin Bacon in the past has been a really great bad guy. Specifically, his portrayal of, I want to say it's not Sebastian Shaw. That feels wrong. What was the name of his character? I want to say that is what it was. No, it is Sebastian Shaw. Look at that. In X-Men First Class was fantastic. And in this, from the minute he's introduced, you're like, oh, he's the bad guy. And the trailers don't even really hide that for you. If you think that's a spoiler, I honestly don't think so at all. But apologies if you think it is one. But in that aspect, this franchise has been kind of stuck in development hell for quite a while. And you can feel that because the film doesn't take any bold choices with Axel. It wants to address modern police work, but everything that happens in the film, outside of a couple moments, really do feel like it could be taking place at any time. Is this the franchise to have an introspection into police work in California? Maybe not, but Eddie Murphy has done drama in the past. Look at something like Dolomite. This could have been a really interesting franchise to have somebody who was a cowboy, for lack of a better description, coming to LA or Beverly Hills and realizing that things have changed and using more modern, younger police officers to play up that dynamic, and the comedy comes from those characters butting heads. That's unfortunately not what the film offers, but let's end the non-spoilers with some positives. I did like Eddie Murphy. I thought he was great as Axel Foley. Judge Reinhold in particular is perfect. Him returning as Billy feels completely like that character. Billy Rosewood has continued his evolution of being a wild man, and his dynamic that he has with John Taggart feels exactly the same, good and bad, but the rapport amongst the three of them, it's perfect. It doesn't feel like any time has passed in terms of those characters bouncing off against each other, which was fantastic, as well as somebody who I've always enjoyed, which is Joseph Gordon-Levitt, who was in a phenomenal television show, Mr. Corman, that unfortunately got canceled. It only had one season, was great. His dynamic, particularly with Eddie Murphy as well as Taylor Page, really works well. And for the latter half of the film, he pretty much spends the back portion going back and forth with Eddie Murphy. And their dynamic is really fun. And one I would have liked to have potentially seen maybe for the whole film if that was the dynamic. A case brings Axel from Detroit to Beverly Hills, and he has to work along with somebody. And in this film, it's kind of just circumstances that place them together. And so, given that the film is fine, I thought it was funny enough. There are some good jokes. Eddie Murphy still clearly has his classic wit with him, which is great. At 63, you would hope it wouldn't have gone away, and it hasn't. There's some good jokes. The one I put before this non-spoiler section, I did quite enjoy with the Lego car. And there are a bunch of instances like that throughout the film. It is quite humorous when it wants to be. It's just from a story and action standpoint, the film doesn't really raise the bar for any of these returning franchises. It definitely is better than A Good Day to Die Hard. Well, most movies are. In terms of fourth installments, it's definitely better than Expendables 4. So it's worth checking out if you have Netflix already. If you don't, maybe do the ad plan and then watch it. But it's not a film I would have enjoyed in theaters. I don't think it would have held up, particularly amongst these other action franchises that do a lot more with less money. Your Monkey Mans, your Boys Kills World, even John Wick's, which the budgets did for those expand over time, but they did a lot with a little. And unfortunately, Beverly Hills Cop, Axel F doesn't do that. I can kind of explain why I probably sound more negative on this in the spoilers section of this review. So let's jump into that because that's kind of where my main issues are. So we're going to jump into spoilers for Beverly Hills Cop, Axel F.
So how many people have you pissed off so far?
I haven't pissed off anybody.
Yeah,
50-50
50-50.
Is it that high?
so far.
Yeah.
Wow.
Full spoilers for Beverly Hills Cop, Axel F incoming, and let's find out.
What happened?
So we see Axel doing Axel things in the beginning of the film. He's in Detroit investigating something he's not supposed to. We get a lot of Detroit Red Wings things, and being obviously a hockey fan, this was quite funny. And Axel plays up the black hockey players bit, and him going into the dressing room saying he's the new goalie, that was a really funny bit, and playing that up, the comedy amongst how Axel gets out of jams is pitch perfect for this character. And as I said in on spoilers, it works perfectly. But what this film does that frustrated me was it felt as almost like they were going through a checklist of things they have to do that are in Beverly Hills Cop movies, but not integrating them in a unique way. So there's a truck chase, there's a shootout in a mansion at the end. We have, what was his name? Serge shows up to mispronounce a bunch of stuff, and we don't really get some of the things you would expect, which is in the clip you just heard with Taggart, Billy, and Axel together. That's at the very end of the film. From a writing standpoint, I found this really interesting. I'd be shocked if it came down to scheduling, but Billy, Taggart, and Axel barely spend any time together, and if you are returning to this franchise, it's something you would want to see more regularly. It was a criticism of the sequel trilogy that we never got to see Han, Luke, and Leia reunite, and I find it especially interesting that given that reception, and obviously Star Wars fans are known for their level-headed takes and not taking things too far at all, that this film would have them be separated. The main conceit of the plot, as I mentioned, Axel's daughter gets involved with something, or no, I don't think I did. Axel's daughter is involved with this police corruption investigation as she's a lawyer working in Beverly Hills. Billy, who is now a private investigator because he was so, I don't even know how to phrase this. He was he was so busy with his investigation that Taggart, who's now the sergeant, didn't want him looking into this because he was concerned for Billy's safety, and Billy gave it up so that way he could continue to investigate this corruption in the private sector. He is kidnapped in the beginning of the film, so we spend most of it looking for Billy, while at the same time, the relationship between Axel and his daughter is continually tested. She blames him for everything, where Axel doesn't really want to accept any of the blame because she was sent off to California because of what was going on in Detroit in the early 90s. And this is one of the first problems that I had with the film, which is they say when Jane was born, and it would have been prior to Beverly Hills Cop 3. Why would she have never come up then? And I understand this is a significant thing of retroactive continuity, which means you're adding things into the past that we hadn't seen before, and the film continuously does this. The relationship that Jane has with Joseph Gordon-Levitt's character, Bobby, has happened in the past. Everything has happened in the past, and everything is just looked at now. All these relationships are just addressed now, and we're talking about things that happened. It is a rule when making films to show and not tell, and a lot of this film is tell. We don't get to see any of the bad relationship between Axel and Jane, why it got to this point. It just is. Everything just is. And unfortunately, that's the case through most of the film. I talked about its limited spectacle. There is a great sequence where Bobby and Axel break out of a police station and steal a helicopter. and fly through Beverly Hills, and it ends with a Shooter McGavin cameo, which is not something I was expecting, and clearly is supposed to be a reference to Happy Gilmore 2, another sequel that I think nobody actually asked for. I would have much preferred this Beverly Hills Cop Axel F than another Happy Gilmore, and their investigation into this police corruption leads them to the head of a specific division. I'm not actually sure which one it was, with Kevin Bacon's character, Captain Cade Grant, who's just evil. That's his thing. He is evil. Everybody knows he's evil. He doesn't even pretend to hide it. And I love Kevin Bacon, but him just sort of chewing the scenery for me in this felt like something you would have seen in the 80s. I don't think it works now for a contemporary 2024 audience. And these are the elements that don't feel as if they've been modernized. They talk about what it's like to be a police officer now. Everybody's recording us and whatnot. But these elements, as I said in non-spoilers, they never come up. Axel is just the same guy in his 60s, and the only real consequence is that Paul Reiser's character, Jeffrey Friedman, his former captain, I believe, or deputy of chief now, quits because of the consequences of what Axel does in the beginning of the film, which is frustrating because that's really it. They get arrested a couple times, and that's when we get to see Joseph Gordon-Levitt meet Axel Foley, and he gets arrested again. Regardless of the potential police corruption, nothing comes of these things. They're arrested multiple times, and I'm assuming it gets dealt with later because John Taggart is also a chief. But the dynamics you would want to see, as I said, are not really present, and we get a lot of pushback from John Taggart. It doesn't seem as if he's doing this to protect them. It just feels like everybody is a pain in his tuchus. I don't necessarily get that why. His motivation is that it's not really given. He's gotten back with his wife, which is great. That's a gag from the previous franchise. But as I said in non-spoilers, the checklist of the chase, the breakout, shenanigans ensue, and then the the shootout in the mansion, nothing in the presentation of those elements you would come to suspect from this film manages to supersede the three. Well, I mean, Beverly Hills Cop 3 is bad, so maybe it supersedes those. I didn't rewatch all of them prior to this. I have seen them all multiple times. These are films that were on TBS slash Peachtree all the time when I was growing up. So this film really does feel like a Sunday afternoon cable movie, which is not meant to be dismissive. It's just the way that I felt while absorbing the film. It plays the score, as I mentioned, by Lorne Balfe. That's how I'm going to go with it. If I'm mispronouncing it, I apologize. And it's this grand, epic version with orchestral layers, but nothing in the movie justifies the playing of the theme song. We don't get a comedic bit that's as funny. Well, I don't know if that's necessarily true. It's a different humor, even though Axel still is just as comical. And this is rated R or 14A, so they're allowed to curse and whatnot. And it's always been, I liked how Axel's always been a little edgier than some other franchises in this genre. When 80s stuff that was more mature was still targeted at kids, it was a weird time, children. It's hard to explain. And the investigation's not really interesting. They use the word SSD a lot. And then the ending is a shootout in a mansion with Billy, John, and Axel, and Bobby. And the main villain gets killed. So the comeuppance, I guess, is that he gets murdered. But the overall investigation's not interesting. It's just kind of a bunch of shenanigans. There is a chase in the beginning where Eddie Murphy, or Axel, is in like a smart car. And it's cool. But again, none of this feels as if this is made for a theatrical film. It feels like a lot of the ideas were maybe the first idea. And I'm not saying they're bad, but they feel almost pedestrian, where we're going through the motions. Okay, now we're in the next action sequence. What's going to happen next? And why I used the sound clip that I used to lead into spoilers is because that dynamic is lost in the film because we're spending time with these new characters. And because of the way that the film is structured, we're constantly having to fill you in on their backstories and relationships as opposed to moving them forward. The dynamic between Jane and Axel is good. I think those two actors worked well off of each other, but it's a lot of Jane blaming Axel, of course, for him abandoning her, and their conversations do evolve, And we get to see that Jane is similar to Axel in terms of their demeanor, and it gets there at the end, but with an unknown mom who may or may not have passed away. I don't actually know if it's brought up in the film what happened to her, but regardless, it's a dynamic we've seen before, and the film doesn't offer a unique perspective on this skewed relationship, so unfortunately it feels too familiar. That's my biggest issue with this movie. I was kind of hoping it was going to be a 21st century version of this franchise, and this film could have been released in 1999, 5 years after Beverly Hills Cop 3. It's better than that, which is good. So, as I said in the non-spoilers, if you're just looking for more Beverly Hills Cop, you get that. But with legacy sequels, I would like to see more than just more. If we're just going to do more, what's really the point of revisiting this franchise? I understand the criticism for making all of our heroes from our childhoods these sad, lonely people, but at least that allows for retrospection and reflection internally, and those characters, typically by the end of those stories, have returned, and the hero's journey is them becoming that character that we loved again. I get that people don't like that, but I find that a lot more interesting than, well, I've just been me, everybody else is the problem, which is kind of what this does. I think it's worth watching on streaming if you have it. If you don't, as I said in non-spoilers, the movie's, it's good. It's not great. It's worth the hour and a half, but I don't think I'll be rewatching it like I do with 1 and 2. So that will do it for spoilers. Let's jump into listener mail and then maybe a little rant on Despicable Me 4. This past week's question of the week was, what is your favorite John Krasinski role? I know a lot of people are going to say Jim Halpert, so let's just get to the listener mail and see what people wrote in. Stephanie, it's got to be Jim, but to be fair, it's because we have 9 seasons of his lovable mischief on The Office. Even in the bad seasons, John Krasinski was great as Jim. Okay. Scotty Cameron, Jim from The Office. Amber Mallon, first-time writer in. Hello, Amber. I hope you enjoy the podcast. Jim Halpert, The Office. I'm not really surprised. I know how popular and successful this show was, but I don't know, maybe you discovered John with Jack Ryan, or heck, even the Quiet Place franchise. I don't know. He was also in, what was the one with the bomb? 13 Hours? I believe that's what it was called. Yeah, he was in that one. So, I don't know. Yeah, I know most people were going to say Jim, but whatever. It was an interesting question, I believe. Now, talking about Axel F, it is a legacy sequel. I'm not going to ask you what your favorite legacy sequel is, because that feels, I would argue, just as easy as what your favorite John Krasinski role is. So this week's question of the week is, what franchise would you like to get a legacy sequel? So one that has been dormant for a while, 10 plus years is the minimum requirement. What franchise that has been dormant for 10 plus years would you like to see get a legacy sequel? If this is your first time listening to the podcast, you can comment on the social media post that usually goes up on Fridays. You can email the podcast, filmrealistpod@gmail.com, or you can submit it within the Spotify app directly. It's always posted within the episode there. So that will do it for listener mail. Thank you to the 3 people who wrote in for this week. And I did see Despicable Me 4 with my children, Melody and Sawyer. They did enjoy it, but it's something I wanted to address. So let's do that now. Despicable Me 4 is hot garbage. It's unfortunate because the Illumination has a very spotty reputation in terms of their theatrical productions, if you were to ask me. I really enjoyed Sing, Despicable Me 1 and 3. I have not liked either of the Minions. I did not like The Grinch, and I did not enjoy Super Mario Bros. The movie. It is simply because of this film's minimal effort to do anything remotely interesting. I know I'm typically not a negative person, but this film is just a compilation of bits. The cohesion of the story is minimal at best, and this really does feel like we have wrung this franchise dry. where Gru's not doing anything interesting. The dynamics expressed are half-baked at best, and because of that, it's not a good movie. The best way to tell a good film for kids and families is if you go into a theater, it'll be quiet. I saw Inside Out 2 with Melody and Sawyer, quiet as can be. This film, unfortunately produced by Illumination, people are talking, there were parents talking. When you fail to hold children's attention because your film is flashing images, it's going for simple and easy jokes, it doesn't require any real thought, it's not thought-provoking of any kind, you lose people. And because of that, these films feel, and to me this is a real insult, disposable. So I would not recommend taking your kids to this. It's fine for at home, but I don't believe it's going to be a film my kids are going to want to rewatch. My kids have seen each of these films in this franchise. We're at 6 now, which is absolutely incredible. I get why they make them. They make money, but they're not films my kids are asking to rewatch. And quite frankly, in my opinion, that's the biggest indicator of the quality of a film aimed at children. Rewatchability. We watched a movie today, day of recording, and typically I ask the two of them to agree so nobody feels left out in what we wind up watching. We're not watching something every day, but today we happened to watch a movie, and both of my kids asked to watch Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. I think that says everything I need it to, so let's end the podcast there. Thank you so much for listening to the podcast. My name is Kyle Naranya. If you did love it and you haven't yet, please give it a 5-star review on your podcast platform. If you have a film nerd friend who might like the ramblings of me, please share it with them. If you do like trailer reactions, they're on Instagram and TikTok. If you don't watch them in full, if you want to watch them cut up, they are put into shorts on YouTube. To everybody who listens to the show and is a regular listener, I truly appreciate you. I don't do this for money. It would be awesome because I could do more projects, but I don't want that to feel like it's a burden to anyone else. I do this because it's a passion of mine, and I like to share it with the world, which is why I do this. If I didn't like doing it, I wouldn't be doing it anymore. Next week's episode of the podcast, it's going to be very interesting. It's the first rom-com of the year. I will be reviewing Fly Me to the Moon, starring Channing Tatum and Scarlett Johansson, so you can look forward to that next week. My name's Kyle Naranya. We'll see you next time.